You got it?
Check.
Yep.
I'm going to put this microphone over here in the middle. This table?
I'll run it. It's okay.
You want to run it? Why don't you just hold it? You can run it then. Chris, let me know when you're ready. Good? All right, guys, let's get started with the breakout recap. So we did 2 breakouts. We did one on consensus, and then we did the other one that was on the cost model and namespaces and the other topics, because we felt that they kind of went together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about consensus, and what I'll do is I'll start out with the questions that we had and then kind of dive into the answers, a little bit about our thought process. And there's a mic here, and I expect that there'll be some spirited discussion. So just put your hand up. Oh, Nash has got a mic. That's good. And there's another mic over there. So just put your hand up, and we'll make sure you get a mic to talk. So the open questions we had is, well, how many races should be allowed to be decided in a single block? The synchronicity constraint to prevent a censorship attack. So this is an attack where the validator just simply ignores a message. And then we had a question around paying out transaction fees, and should those be delayed? If the fees exceed the validator's stake, then the validator could theoretically just walk. And then open question on what is a validator rotation / assignment. So we'll start with some of the simpler ones. How many races should be allowed to be decided in a single block? So Greg had an feeling that he wanted to go wide versus deep, and we had a good discussion around why that would be a good idea. And one of the principles was if we go wide, then it's more quote unquote fair. There's this concept of fairness principle. And one of the discussions that came out of it is with phlogiston, with this model, is do we have to persist phlogiston across multiple blocks because the execution program, because you're not going down deep, you're going across, execution could have to persist over multiple blocks. And so we kind of stole Joe and we talked about that, and there's no assumption in his model around having to go all the way through, right? We can actually persist phlogiston through. I'm tired. Oh, scratch that? Okay. So go ahead, grab a mic, and let's come to agreement on this. Get a mic.
Hello? Oh, okay. It's kind of towards the end of the meeting, we discussed the feasibility and benefits of doing a run to quiescence model, right? And I guess my reluctance was in having one validator be essentially the chooser of the particular trace that was chosen, right? But if we run to quiescence, then we, in general, we have a good idea of what it means to actually terminate a program. You can give flow refunds, and you can still prevent resource attacks from the miner. So with regard to flow, quiescence model appears preferable in some way.
And yeah, and it's not that one validator gets to choose.
Right.
It's that the network chooses a validator's trace, and there's only one that the network chooses as a whole, even though multiple traces were proposed, right? Because in general, if you're only sending your transaction to one node, you're doing it wrong, right? So you'll send your transactions to 3 or 4 different nodes in the network, and they'll each produce a trace and propose it. And then everyone will accept the first one, the first valid one that they see that they think the network will converge on, and so forth.
And
I think it's straightforward to write. It'd be straightforward to write code where it doesn't really matter who won the race. If I produce a transaction that pays my credit card bills and my power bill and my mortgage, as long as I've got enough money to pay for all three of them, it really doesn't matter which one got paid first and second and third. So.
And if you're willing to race, you should.
Yeah, if you're willing to race, you should be willing to accept all the outcomes. So the fact that somebody picked one of the set of all outcomes should be acceptable to you.
Yeah, the issue there, though, is
if you go wide, you have a chance, you're effectively delaying, so you have a chance to get more clients in. If you have one trace, then it could be just, one party just sent in the set of requests, and other parties haven't even had a chance to know that this first phase was unlocked.
that was the fairness.
Yeah, our decision was it wasn't fair. You couldn't make it fair, so get over it. Exactly, yeah. Life isn't fair, and neither is the blockchain. So.
Non-determinism is not fairness. It's just non-determinism.
So
what's the decision?
yeah, what's the decision then?
The decision providing whatever.
Is that it is preferable with respect to the cost model to use a run to quiescence model.
What is the implication for the number of races to be decided in a single block then? We go deep all the way through to the end? They go deep all the way to the end. Okay.
So this creates quiescence. Run to quiescence makes things like data feed harder, and we're still thinking about if we can have our cake and eat it too.
Oh, okay, all right, good.
Okay.
I think it over.
So we also talked about how validators join the network, just at a very high level. And I guess we kind of have to draw it. I'm going to try to draw it out. I'll do my best, Mike, here. Mike, you're going to have to keep me honest here on this. So this represents blocks. And here we have a validator. So when this block, yep, this is block height. And so when this block appears in the justification, you're going to have to keep me honest here. Okay, go ahead. One more line here. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, so thinking about block height, this node here doesn't have a block height because you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
So we can't just pick a block height as a time when we're going to make a change.
Right, so for that reason, because it is a DAG, we'll have to look at justification messages to determine when a validator has joined the network. Keep me honest here. And so our thinking is, if this is the first block we're seeing from that validator as part of the justification message, this is where we may start accepting that validator's messages. And then later on, if we see secondary messages coming in justification messages. This is where now you have to, falls to a must accept messages from this validator now, because we've got multiple messages where their blocks that they have proposed are in the justification. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, there's a complexity here, because in our discussion, one of the things we realized is that each region also has to publish its cost function. And so when do you begin calculating the cost based on the new cost function versus the previous one?
If you have to establish a causal link, so you point back at this one occurred after we changed the cost function, so you'll point back a causal apparent link to say we changed it, so it's after this.
I think the trade-off that we discussed really is either we accept in protocol fault tolerance, or there's a lot of complexity around tracking the validator rotation, because now everything has to be conditional on, well, if that validator rotation block is finalized, then these, you know, I'm accepting this part. These blocks are not going to be reverted. But and the alternative is you in protocol say I accept, you know, whatever, this many Byzantine faults, and that seems to be the trade-off. But even beyond that, the fact that it's a DAG, there's this secondary issue, right?
So last week when Mike and I were thinking about the Ant Army attack, one of the things that we considered was that when you go to become a validator, you have to stake, but then you also have to pay a fee to each of the existing validators. And that fee would be an incentive for them to go ahead and accept, right?
yeah, I understand your desire. Yeah. It's certainly incentivizing.
It would also incentivize sticking around, because if you're around long enough that you're the old guy, you get all your fee back, all the fees you paid to join back.
Well, that leads into one of the other issues.
Go ahead. Which issue, Greg?
So there's also this issue that.
There's also the trade-off that I raised before, which has to do with the fee percentage of stake, fee rate, and when fees are paid out, right? So all of those factors have to be carefully balanced, because otherwise validators can like stake so much, then they get paid out their stake plus some ROI, and then they walk.
And they don't care, right? They can defect, they can do whatever.
So one of the ways that you could handle that is like your fees increase your stake, and then like to withdraw them, we treat that as the same as a partial unbonding.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, what I'm saying is there's a set of relationships here that have to be carefully tuned, right? Especially in the presence of cartels. Right? Because if a validator gets to a certain point, well, got my stake but this much, and cartel's willing to top it out this much. Right? Yeah, sure. I'm their man.
Yeah. For the TV audience, I was just simply saying there has to be a relationship amongst these things because of this issue, right? If they get so much past their stake, with the fees, then it may be that a cartel can pick them off, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So I put up this much stake. I've got that much plus whatever already in my back pocket. And, you know, because whatever, this region was very profitable, right? It happened overnight, you know, I got that much. And now a cartel comes along and says, hey, I can increase your ROI by this much, right? So just all you got to do is vote my way.
I get the feeling that people are thinking in the room.
Should we have the cost model people go?
Yes. We had a discussion around minimum number of validators and validator rotation as well. Okay. We can have the cost model guys go. Is there anything I missed, Greg? Are there any topics that we want?
Yeah, what was the, let's just,
I was arguing, I was arguing that you should have a minimum, some kind of minimum.
not just one.
Not just one, yeah.
Not very secure. And the thing I'm really worried about is you get this fringe along the validator tree, right? Or validator lattice, where you got lots and lots of
Yeah, so what I was worried about was you got all of these this whole fringe of regions that have just a few validators. And then again, a cartel can come along and say, you, and it's cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah, but people shouldn't be deploying contracts there, right? Like there's always a trade-off between the number of validators in a region and the safety, right? So if you want your contract to be very safe and for the consensus to be very strong and hard to revert, then you deploy it in a region with a lot of validators. If you want it to be fast or to have access to some other esoteric hardware, then that may only be available in a region with a small number of validators, and you have to trust them more, right? But you do because they've deployed something esoteric, right? Don't we want to support both use cases?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we talked about that, but then it was how, like, does that introduce any vulnerability into we talked about Rev, like a cartel owns they 10x their amount of Rev, and then when they try to do a transaction or something out of their little area, could that impact the other things, or how do you control on that? So that's kind of what we talked about.
I mean, you still have to have a list of all the transactions that occurred, right? So you could have, specialized SAT solving hardware, right? That's off-chain stuff, and you make it available through some library that exists in your region, has only a small number of validators. If you equivocate and double spend in your region, there's still evidence of that. The evidence is exactly the same as it ever was. It's just that it's in your local region, right? But somebody could be watching you. You could still have read-only nodes connecting to what you're doing, and if they spot you cheating, they can slash you.
Well, I think limited slashing to just validators, but that's a side.
Okay, then if you did that, then you need the minimum number of validators.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But you shouldn't. Why did we do that?
Even if, no. Even if you are a read-only node and you detect slashing, you could still get somebody slashed. You just can't do it yourself.
Oh yeah, that's
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you can have lots of kibitzers, and the peanut gallery is constantly throwing peanuts. Yeah, for sure. But the thing that I think the thing that Vlad was concerned about was then you still can have these sort of minimum security validated regions impacting higher level join regions. That's the problem, because now at a minimum the other validator group has to go and read all their transactions.
No, they don't have to. For the join group, you don't have to go read their transactions. You only have to follow the transactions when they're coming up with something that's a right to a name in a particular region. Then you have to say, like, well, did they follow the rules or did they magic this out of thin air?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, there are these cases where they have to go and trace the causal links back. Yeah.
Who's presenting the next? Okay, come on up, Joe. Pass the baton to you.
Test. Is that good? Yep. Okay. Open questions. How do you split out rewards to the validators? Supposing, or actually I'll start with kind of the bigger decision. Yeah, so like I said, we're preferring to think about gas in the quiescence model, which essentially means, but everything else is the same. We still get to differentiate between paying for continuation and not. But with the quiescence model, because we can detect when something is actually completed, or assuming that, we can detect when someone is trying to overspend. We can detect when an agent is attempting to use resources they did not pay for, and we can give refunds.
Just want to make sure quiescence is run to the next 4 that you don't have anything.
Yeah.
So like it's not termination; it's quiescence.
Yeah, exactly.
Quiescence means you have, if you think of the R-chain state as a rolling term, the state is a rolling term that has no reductions, or we would have already performed them. And so when you do a deployment, we do all of the reductions that we can, and when there are no more, that is quiescence.
Right.
Eager. It's eager reduction.
Yeah. But keep in mind, that still means that we're going to have to store a flow balance for persistent reads, right? It just means that when essentially like the trace completes, from that for event, when everything goes down to a ground level process, then we understand that we can do a refund. And also discuss the possibility of being able to refill on gas, at least for mercury, for sure. It's not feasible. There are, at least in my opinion, concurrency concerns with consistency. In my opinion, it seems to open up an attack vector. I can intentionally write a program that only partially evaluates. So if I assume that when I get an out-of-flow error, that I can send a request for more, I'm never going to know if that request comes back. So I'm effectively just waiting around, right? I either archive the other processes or something. But that itself becomes an attack vector. Say I write a program that increments a balance, throws a flow error, and then fails to decrement another balance, just as a conception. It also there are ways that you can do it, as Kyle was pointing out, to where you can effectively archive processes that have run out of flow, right? Assuming that the problem I just mentioned isn't a thing, but it still uses minor resources. And the point of flow, arguably, is to prevent misuse of minor resources. Despite what data structure you choose, if it still doesn't cost that much to DOS someone, because you're always requesting more or refills on flow, then if I have enough resources, I can consume a significant amount of yours.
So I don't think that that's a real issue. You could set some threshold below that's not 0 that is returned to you if you complete, but if you reach that threshold, we spend the rest of it archiving your term.
Yeah, but then you're still using up storage. It's still,
Well, but you
you've
just
still
paid for it.
archived. Huh?
You paid for it.
But you're not paying for it periodically. You do like a
But
one-time.
But with the model I showed you, you don't have to continually store the term.
No, you don't have to store the terms themselves, right? But you store the hash to the term.
No, you store basically log-n hashes that are roots of complete tries.
Yeah, and
But
my argument.
that's a tiny amount. It's not even worth.
Yeah.
Anyway, you could. There's a way to get around that problem, which is we reserve some amount to pay for processing of the out of flow error, and if you're well behaved, you get it back.
Oh, yeah.
That solves your DOS argument.
But it doesn't do any. But if I have to store it, if I have to persist things, right? Like even if it's just a hash, right? You're saying that there are ways that you could efficiently store it to where it's log n, right? But I'm still. But say that never comes back. Say I never decide to refill. Then now I've archived these.
Okay, just so the DOS argument, there's a straightforward solution. Don't make that argument. So the problem with it is more like I think that your problem with the security of and the security issue I think is the biggest issue with it. That like we don't want to have. We want to be able to say that certain things either all happen or don't happen.
Right. Okay.
Understood the trade-off.
Cool. Got it. Another question we asked: how do you split out rewards to the validators? And I guess this will kind of lead into determining the cost of running contracts in higher namespaces. But there were essentially two proposals. If you run a contract and it's validated by n validators, then either you split up the remaining evenly. You can, split it by some factor. It could be, like stake size. It could be a number. But effectively, like, split it somehow. Not that big deal. What happens, or how do you cost this if you have a, join B, then you have A, B. If you run a contract in A join B, how much does it cost? And what we came to was that it costs cost of A plus the cost of B, which is pretty straightforward because the higher up the lattice you go, the more nodes are running your contract. It should be more expensive. So more things running your contract is more secure, is more expensive, paying for security. Cool. Oh no, just something we talked about. So say we talked about code mobility a bit. So say I want to try to move a contract from region 1 to region 2, and we do allow regions to specify their own cost models effectively, so they get to determine how much computation actually costs. What's to stop a region from jacking up the price of computation in a particular area in order to prevent activity on the contract? What we resolved to, or an approach, is effectively that if you want to change the cost model of your region, then that has to be agreed upon globally. Because we have things like A join B, right? In order for A join B to know how much it costs to run a contract, it has to know the cost models of A and B. So updating a cost model is a global activity. Everyone has to agree.
Yeah, that's desirable though, right? The CapEx is slow. So when people deploy hardware, they want to have a cost model that they can count on for some reasonable period of time. And then when people convert from rev to flow, they want their contracts to execute with a relatively stable cost model. So you don't want a lot of volatility in the cost models per region, right? Same as you don't want a lot of volatility in the validators.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you know, like if someone discovers a major bug, right? You know, it's like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
there's a window during which it can be exploited.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know, you should try not to have major bugs.
You don't have to let people exploit it, right? You could do the update, and then you could just say, like, okay, we're going to be conservative. We aren't going to run anything until it's updated. So you don't necessarily have to let people exploit it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you might lose some revenue due to, like, downtime, but that's kind of expected with a major bug.
How often would you want the cost model recalculated? I mean,
More or less when.
Well, I was just thinking there's at the beginning of the network, there's going to be a lot of volatility because people are figuring stuff out, right? And so if that's decelerated, you know, then you see what I'm saying?
So, if I understood correctly, the higher the more the joins are, the more namespaces are joined regions, the higher the costs of the getting the consensus. So, what is it possible that there will be like a malicious region that will update its cost model often, so it creates a lot of strain on the network?
To spam the network, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about that actually. They would have to be a transaction, right? Updating a cost model should be a transaction. So the question is, if we're updating the cost model and the transaction has to be run, then who pays for it? And it seems like you would run a number of, or you would have a contract effectively, right, that waits for essentially, you know, a transaction from each validator in a given set to issue one of these requests, right? And then when it realizes that its count is, you know, when it reaches a count, then it knows that all of the all the validators have agreed, but also those are transactions that each validator has to pay for independently. So if each validator is willing to pay to update the cost model, right, then we get the same security. So yeah, just because you're a validator doesn't mean that you can't deploy or like issue transactions. Is that good?
Yeah, I will have to think because.
Oh, sure. Okay. And those are the main points, yeah? Cool.